Hi, welcome to English Avenue today. I'm Ethan Cole. Today's story isn't only about a scientist. It's about what stubborn hope can do when life gets impossibly hard. Stephen Hawking's journey shows that brilliance is not the only engine of achievement. Perseverance, curiosity, and the human spirit matter just as much. As you read, imagine you're practicing active listening in English. Notice how ideas are linked, how key phrases repeat for emphasis, and how transitions keep the story moving. Hawking's life is proof that obstacles don't have to end our ambitions. They can sharpen them. From the start, his tale invites us to pay attention to words that signal determination: adapt, learn, keep going, and to the images that carry them, like a wheelchair that becomes a vehicle for independence, or a robotic voice that carries wisdom across the world. Stephen's story is not a museum piece about science. It's a living guide to resilience. It offers a reminder to look beyond immediate difficulties and to aim for the stars, literally and figuratively. Whether you're mastering new vocabulary or facing a personal challenge, take this as a companion message. Intelligence is more than scores and certificates. It is the ability to respond to change without surrendering your purpose. Let this narrative be both English practice and a blueprint for persistence. Listen for meaning, not just words. Notice possibility, not just limits. And remember that even when circumstances narrow our options, they can widen our vision. Hawking's life says, learn bravely, think deeply, and refuse to be defined by what you can't do. Stephen William Hawking was born in Oxford on the 8th of January 1942, exactly 3 centuries after Galileo's death, a symbolic date for someone destined to challenge how we think about the universe. He grew up in a family that treated ideas like daily bread. His father, Frank, was a medical researcher, and his mother, Isabel, had been a teacher. Both prized education and encouraged lively debate at the dinner table. That environment trained Stephen to ask why and how before accepting any conclusion, and it taught him to see books as maps to terrain he could not yet travel. At school, he was not the fastest runner or the neatest note-taker, and he wasn't especially social. Classmates teasingly called him Einstein, a label he wore with quiet amusement because it aligned with his inner world. He preferred puzzles to playgrounds, telescopes to team sports, and the abstract logic of mathematics to the everyday popularity contests of childhood. While others chased balls across fields, he chased questions across galaxies. What is time? Why do stars burn? How does the universe keep its balance? He didn't dazzle teachers with perfect handwriting or tidy margins, but he surprised them with the power of his reasoning, the way he could turn a simple question into a doorway to deeper understanding. At Albans School, he found both challenge and permission to think at scale. He learned to sit with a problem until it yielded, and to ignore the noise of comparison. The family's confidence gave him courage to be different, slow in some skills, swift in thought, and always in love with the wide, mysterious sky. At 17, Stephen arrived at Oxford, one of the world's most demanding academic arenas, not entirely sure what his future would be, but very sure about what fascinated him: physics and mathematics. He chose physics, where the questions felt daring and fundamental, and where he could test his intuition against the hardest problems he could find. Oxford could be intimidating tradition in stone, excellence expected, but Stephen learned to thrive by narrowing his attention to essentials. He was not a loud presence in lecture halls or common rooms. He was a quiet forge, where ideas heated and were hammered into shape. Shy and sparing with small talk, he spent long hours in libraries, taking mental notes more than physical ones, letting the patterns of equations form in his head the way constellations form in the night sky. Doubt visited him, as it visits anyone who cares deeply about doing meaningful work. Was he the smartest in the room? Did that even matter? He discovered that what mattered was not being the brightest star, but burning steadily enough to keep asking real questions. Space and time became more than subjects. They became companions. He trained his mind to hold multiple possibilities at once, to accept that uncertainty is not an enemy of knowledge, but its starting point. Oxford taught him that most breakthroughs begin as disciplined persistence disguised as ordinary study. He learned to trust the slow build of understanding, to respect the rigor of proof, and to keep pushing even when solutions retreated just out of reach. Those habits, patience, concentration, and a refusal to be rushed into shallow answers, would later support him when life grew unimaginably hard. In his early 20s, the ground shifted. Stephen noticed small betrayals in his body, awkward steps, clumsy hands, a fatigue that didn't make sense. Tests followed tests, and finally came the verdict: amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS, a progressive disease that would steadily weaken his muscles. The prognosis was brutal: only a few years to live, a narrowing future, a body shutting down while the mind remained clear. For a 1-year-old filled with plans, the news could have flattened everything. Instead, after a season of fear and grief, Stephen made a stark decision. If time was short, he would use it wholly. If strength was draining, he would focus it on what he loved most: understanding the universe. He chose not denial but direction. He did not pretend the disease was small. He decided it would not be sovereign. Rather than retreat from study, he leaned into it, finding in equations a kind of steadiness that the body could no longer supply. That choice, turning toward work, toward curiosity, reframed the illness from a prison into a pressure that forged resolve. He accepted help where he needed it, but guarded the independence of his mind, refusing to let the prognosis write the last word on his life. This was the first of many adaptations, a commitment to live fully in the present and to keep asking big questions even as ordinary tasks grew difficult. As ALS advanced, it took from Stephen the ease of walking, then the use of his hands, and later the clarity of his speech, but it never touched the vividness of his thoughts. The wheelchair entered his life as a necessity, and soon became an emblem not of defeat, but of mobility redesigned. He traveled to conferences, navigated campuses, and gave lectures, proving that motion can be engineered and independence can be reimagined. Each loss forced a new solution. Where muscles failed, tools intervened. Where strength thinned, planning thickened. He learned that resilience isn't a single heroic act, but a daily practice, adapting routines, accepting assistance, and returning, again and again, to the work that mattered most. People saw a body under siege and expected retreat. Instead, they witnessed audacity. The chair that many would see as a limit became a vehicle for presence, putting him in rooms where his ideas could collide with others and evolve. His persistence taught a broader lesson. Dignity grows when we choose purpose over pride. He refused to be reduced to a diagnosis. He allowed himself to be defined by the questions he pursued. Even as fatigue pressed in, he carved out hours for thinking, sketching arguments in his mind, storing steps of a proof where his hands could not keep pace. The world responded not with pity, but with recognition that courage can look like continued work. He modeled a form of strength that does not deny pain, yet refuses to give it the narrative lead. In that posture, he kept moving, and in moving, he kept enlarging what seemed possible for a scientist, a patient, a human being. When speaking became fragile and then failed, Stephen chose adaptation over silence. In the mid-1980 seconds, he worked with engineers to build a system that translated tiny cheek muscle movements into text, and from text into synthesized speech. The new voice did not sound human. It was metallic, measured, unmistakable, and it became a bridge between his interior world and the public square. With that device, he returned to lecterns and auditoriums, not as a diminished presence but as a reconfigured one, demonstrating that communication is more than tone and timbre. It is intention carried clearly. The interface slowed him down, yet the slowness clarified his argument, forcing precision and sharpening phrasing until each sentence landed like a step on a carefully plotted path. Students in distant halls could still hear him explain infinities and horizons. Colleagues could still debate equations and paradoxes. The wider public could still feel the spark of wonder when he spoke about the cosmos. Technology did not erase the loss. It converted loss into leverage. The device became part of his identity, a signature as recognizable as his glasses and his chair. In that robotic cadence lived warmth, wit, and challenge proof that expression depends less on perfect instruments than on an undiminished desire to be understood. Where many might have withdrawn, he advanced, showing that a redesigned voice can still carry original thought, that ingenuity can route around damage, and that the will to connect can outpace almost any barrier. Long before his name was famous outside physics, Stevens startled the field by proposing that black holes are not perfectly black. Using quantum reasoning near the event horizon, he argued in 1974 that particle-antiparticle effects would let a faint radiation escape, allowing black holes to lose mass and energy over time. This was not a tweak to an existing picture. It was a new lens that forced general relativity and quantum mechanics to stare at each other across a boundary where both had claims. If black holes could evaporate, then information and thermodynamics in extreme gravity needed rethinking, and entire lines of inquiry opened. The idea was audacious because it contradicted a powerful intuition that gravity so strong nothing, including light, could get out. Yet the math said otherwise, and the community had to grapple with the implications. Hawking radiation gave physicists a way to connect cosmic monsters with quantum whispers, and it put Stephen at the center of a debate that would shape theoretical work for decades. More broadly, it demonstrated his habit of asking the unsettling question just where most people stopped, and following the logic wherever it led, even to the edge of a black hole. Alongside black holes, Stephen pursued the grand ambition of uniting general relativity, the geometry of gravity with quantum mechanics, the rules of the very small. He explored the origin of the universe, time's arrows, and the conditions under which space itself could begin. These were not single problems with quick answers, but sweeping terrains where even a partial map changes how others travel. Invitations followed, lectures across continents, collaborations in major institutes, and eventually one of academia's great honors holding the Lucasian Professorship of Mathematics at Cambridge. Fame arrived not as celebrity for its own sake, but as recognition that his questions and results were reshaping the conversation. He had become the scientist lay people could name and students could watch, a symbol of how far a focused mind can go even when the body resists. Awards decorated his career, yet what mattered to him remained steady: clarity of thought, the pleasure of a clean argument, and the next problem just out of reach. With each step, he demonstrated that influence in science is earned by the seriousness of the questions you are willing to chase and the patience with which you test your answers. Stephen's life off the page was full and complicated. He married Jane Wilde in 1965. They built a home while his career accelerated and his illness advanced, and they welcomed 3 children: Robert, Lucy, and Tim. Love met logistics, research trips, medical needs, and the daily work of care. Over time, the strain became heavy, and after 25 years, they separated, remaining devoted co-parents. In 1995, he married Elaine Mason, a nurse who had supported his care. That relationship, too, had challenges and eventually ended. The personal story does not cancel the scientific one. It sits beside it, reminding us that even icons negotiate ordinary human hopes and hurts. Through it all, Stephen prized his role as a father and kept humor at hand, using laughter as a release valve in a life otherwise crowded by deadlines, diagnoses, and debates about the cosmos. Stephen did not only speak to specialists, he spoke to everyone willing to listen. In 1988, he published A Brief History of Time, a book that translated the grand machinery of cosmology into language curious readers could carry. It became a global bestseller, not because it simplified recklessly, but because it trusted people to meet big ideas with patience. The public lectures continued, the interviews multiplied, and the robotic voice became part of our shared cultural soundscape. He turned technical puzzles, singularities, horizons, quantum foam into invitations to wonder. Crucially, he framed science not as a cold ledger of facts, but as a human pursuit powered by curiosity, argument, and imagination. His presence on television, in documentaries, and in auditoriums did more than sell books. It modeled intellectual hospitality. He showed that you can keep your standards high and your door open, that rigor and accessibility are allies, not enemies. In doing so, he widened the circle of people who feel at home in scientific conversation, giving students a reason to persist and non-specialists a reason to care. Beyond equations, Stephen offered a philosophy of living that many found bracing and kind. Look up at the stars and not down at your feet. He liked to say, a sentence that repositions our gaze from immediate obstacles to expansive possibility. It does not deny the reality of hardship. It asserts that direction matters more than difficulty. He also said, intelligence is the ability to adapt to change, a definition he embodied daily as illness rewrote the rules of ordinary life. For him, cleverness, without resilience, was brittle. True intelligence included flexibility, curiosity, humility, and the capacity to rebuild. Another favorite warning was, the greatest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance, it is the illusion of knowledge. In practice, that meant testing assumptions, refusing to settle for comfortable answers, and remembering that what we know today can be refined tomorrow. He urged us to keep learning because the universe is too large for certainty to be casual. Stephen's curiosity was not performative, it was practical. He treated questions as engines, not ornaments, and he trusted that better questions could carry us through seasons of loss. From that posture, he looked outward at humanity's future and felt both hope and concern. He worried about threats we create: climate change, nuclear conflict, unwise uses of technology, and he argued that survival may require us to become a multi-planet species. We are not going to survive on Earth for another 1,000 years unless we spread into space, he said, not as an excuse to neglect our planet, but as a challenge to extend our reach while we repair our home. He wanted us to steward Earth better, cut emissions, respect ecosystems, design tools that amplify wisdom rather than amplify harm, because intelligence without responsibility is a dead end. His message to students and citizens was consistent. Be courageous in imagination and careful in action. Let awe drive you forward, and let ethics hold you steady. He believed science is a human enterprise with moral consequences, and that progress measured only by power is not progress worth having. The life lessons, then, form a tight weave. Look up, adapt, resist the illusion that you already know enough, protect the world you have, prepare for worlds you might one day reach, and above all, keep the conversation between humility and ambition alive. In classrooms and kitchens, in laboratories and city councils, those lessons scale. They turn fear into focus, pain into perspective, and possibility into a plan. In later years, Stephen pressed into even bolder questions, writing The Grand Design in 2010, and arguing that the universe could arise within the laws of physics without requiring a creator. The claim stirred debate well beyond academia because it asked readers to reconsider old frameworks and to see cosmology as a place where philosophy and physics meet. Agree or disagree, people were thinking, and that was his aim, to keep minds in motion. He collaborated widely, advised projects that pushed technology forward, and nurtured younger scientists who would carry the inquiry further than one lifetime allows. Meanwhile, he kept his humor alive, a bright thread through the fabric of a demanding existence. He joked that being married twice had greatly improved his understanding of the universe, a line delivered in that distinctive synthetic voice that made audiences laugh and then lean in. Humor did not trivialize his challenges. It humanized them, showing that joy can coexist with constraint and that wit can puncture the solemnity that sometimes gathers around genius. His death on the 14th of March 2018, Pi Day, fittingly closed a remarkable human story, but did not end its influence. The legacy continues in several intertwined strands. First, there is the scientific impact, a reimagined picture of black holes, sharper questions about information and entropy, and a generation of researchers energized by the example of a thinker who crossed boundaries without apology. Second, there is the cultural impact, millions who discovered that science can be an open door, not a guarded gate. Readers who found in A Brief History of Time a path from confusion to clarity. Viewers who learn to associate a robotic voice with warmth, rigor, and wonder. Third, there is the ethical and existential legacy. The insistence that knowledge carries responsibility, that we should plan for futures larger than our lifetimes, and that we must never confuse convenience with truth. Finally, there is the personal legacy, the one most people feel when they think of Stephen Hawking. The image of a person who refused to be compressed by his circumstances, who converted obstacles into structures for growth, and who kept choosing purpose in the face of pain. That image carries practical instructions for anyone standing at a threshold where fear and hope argue. Start where you are, with the body and tools you have. Let curiosity set your agenda, not your limitations. When one path closes, invent another. When a voice fails, build a new one. When a timetable shrinks, focus its hours on work that outlives you. Treat failure as feedback and success as a reason to raise the next, harder question. If you lead a lab, make it a place where students are safe to wonder. If you teach, make your classroom a launch pad. If you build technology, fit it to people's deepest needs, not their shallowest impulses. The wheelchair and synthesizer are no longer here to carry him from lecture to lecture, but their lesson travels. Design can be dignified, and thought can travel farther than flesh. His story also reframes strength. It shows that strength is not the absence of weakness, but the presence of commitment. He did not conquer ALS by pretending it wasn't real. He outflanked it by insisting that his mind would remain in play. That reframing is available to all of us, whatever our difficulties. We can decide what will be central, our limitations or our aims, and then build lives that serve the center we choose. If you need a sentence to carry out of this story and into your own, try this. While there's life, there's hope. It is simple, but in his voice, it becomes a practice, the daily choice, to greet each morning as another chance to learn, to love, to contribute. Look up at the stars, he said, and not down at your feet. The sky above you belongs to everyone, and so does the work of understanding it. If you feel small, remember that small does not mean powerless. If you feel late, remember that late does not mean lost. The universe is vast and patient, and it answers to those who persist. Walk, roll, or be carried toward your questions, and when you arrive, ask them with all your heart. Then listen hard for the answers, adjust your course, and keep going. That is the legacy of Stephen Hawking. Not only the theories that changed our maps of the cosmos, but the courage that can change our maps of ourselves. Feeling inspired by Stephen Hawking's journey? Keep the momentum going. Share this video with a friend or family member who needs a boost today. Your one click could spark someone's next step forward. Then hit subscribe to English Avenue today and turn on the bell to never miss our next English story, listening practice, and life lesson. Learn weekly with us, grow your vocabulary, and fuel your motivation. Let's rise together, language by language, story by story. Subscribe, share, and keep learning.